Not as
Hurricane Bonnie still bashing the North Carolina coast with flooding rains, tornadoes, extremely large waves, and hurricane-force winds. It's moving very slowly, and the devastation will continue for the rest of tonight.
Nada.
You are now looking at live pictures at the scene here at Morehead City. That area has sustained a variety of damage, and we'll take you there live for the latest on the damage here in just a few minutes. Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Weather Center. I'm Dave Schwartz. Here at the Weather Channel, we've been keeping Hurricane Bonnie at the front of our minds here as it has approached the United States. Now it has stalled, and our hurricane specialist John Hope will let you know what you could be in for because of that eventuality. Jim Cantori has been standing by live all day long. If you've been watching the Weather Channel, you've seen him. He's at Morehead City, and I'll tell you, the winds have let up very seldom. You've been fighting them all day, and now tonight, Jim.
Dave, this is not the job for the weak at heart. Let's just put it that way. And no doubt it's been a rough day here. The big problem with this hurricane, besides the fact that it can knock you over if you're not prepared for it, is these winds are going to stay up. You mentioned the hurricane is stationary now. So instead of getting this thing in and out and getting the damage over with, it's just going to sit here and continue to hammer away, especially at the coastline. So big problems there. Unfortunately, 60% of Carteret County, which is where I am in Morehead City, is without power. So the power crews will not be allowed out tonight. Again, folks, you're experiencing night vision, which is basically an asset that we add to the lens to take advantage of any ambient light that's available to let you see in the dark, and that's all it is. You remember seeing a lot of this during Desert Storm, and you're seeing it here with our weather broadcast tonight as we bring you live pictures from Morehead City and a look, obviously, at very, very windy conditions. Dave, we continue to see very strong tropical storm force gusts. The rain has not been heavy lately, so that's been good news, but we've easily picked up 5 inches of rain here, and I would imagine inland there's been double that, if not triple that. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks a lot, Jim. It seems as if the heavy rain's been north of you in far northeastern North Carolina, 5 to 9 inches.
Okay.
Thanks so much for that live report. Boy, oh boy, how about getting buffeted by those winds? Well, for the latest analysis, we turn to the man, hurricane expert, Mr. John Hope. And John, this is a hurricane that stalled. Perhaps the worst is over on the coast as far as storm surge goes, but the winds will be slow to recede.
Well, the high tide tonight, the high tide is just coming up. There's still a lot of onshore winds, and these are going to persist through the night. So I'm afraid there's still going to be quite a bit of surge coming in at the time of high tide. And after that, it should recede some because we expect the hurricane to weaken. Once the center is inland, and it's not inland clearly as we'd like to see it, it's sort of just edging its way ever so slowly inland. But we think it's going to be overland for about the next 24 hours.
So would you assume a slow weakening
Yes,
tonight and tomorrow?
once we get the center in and heads up as we think it will in this general direction, we think slow weakening should ensue. It's already weakened some, the winds are down to 105 miles per hour.
Now, away from the coast, there's still plenty of heavy rain back here up to about 100 miles away from the coast. So if that hurricane takes a track like this, it should be rainy and windy for the next day and a half.
Oh, no doubt about it. It's going to rain over areas that have already begun to have a lot of rain, so the flooding problem is very serious, I'm afraid.
Tornadoes, also a possibility?
There have been some tornadoes reported already, and those are in the rain bands away from the center of the storm.
And a tornado watch is in effect until 5 a.m. for northeastern North Carolina. Also some flood warnings in effect. Look at all the rain that's piled up here. Doppler estimated precipitation that's fallen here in North Carolina. And we believe that these estimates here of between 3 and 5 inches are maybe half of what's actually occurred.
Sometimes in the tropical system, the raindrops are smaller and the Doppler underestimates a little bit.
Okay, John, well, we've talked about the rain, the possible tornadoes for the rest of tonight. There's still problems out there with regard to high surf and coastal flooding, as long as we have those onshore winds.
Well, the surf has been generated over days and days, when this storm is approaching, and that surf is already pounding all the way up to New England, from New England down to Florida. And that's going to continue to do that. That's not ready to abate at all.
Well, John, we've got a couple of meteorologists who have seen this firsthand, and we're going to go to them right now. Mr. Jeff Morrow and also Bill Keneally on the coast of North Carolina. The sun is set, obviously, but earlier you guys saw some pounding surf, rain and wind of your own. Isn't that right, Bill?
That is correct, Dave. We did not get on the barrier island, but we were hunkered down here on the mainland side. We're about a mile as the crow flies from the actual island, and to our estimation and talks with the mayor, it doesn't seem like the damage was as bad as Fran. Now, that is not definitive. They're going to go in there and see what kind of water damage was sustained, but it looks like structural damage was reasonably minimal. I think we have some better news going on down here tonight, Dave. It looks like the winds are starting to back around a little bit. It's starting to shoot through this alcove, and I say better news because that is more of a north wind, and hopefully that'll begin to pump in some drier air. You guys talked about all the rain that fell here, and we were a prime recipient of that. Across the county and across the area, reports from Carolina Power and Light of about 180,000 customers still without power. We're included in that mix, by the way. And once again, we've had some reports of some windows blown out of some of the New Hanover County schools. But other than that, we're in pretty good shape. You can get around, but I wouldn't advise it. It's illegal. There's a curfew in effect. It goes from 8 p.m. until 6 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, tomorrow sometime, maybe the next day, they will assess whether they will allow residents back on the barrier island of Wrightsville Beach. Let's get check on what's happening farther up the coast. We'll do that by going up to Jeff Morrow, and he's in Nag's Head. Good evening, Jeff.
Well, I have to say, Bill, that this is the most wind we have probably during the whole course of the day, and that's not saying too much, but we do have some gusts here, probably up to around 30 or 35 miles an hour. That's been enough to really kick up the ocean pretty much today, and even late tonight we can pan down and show you how the tide coming in, some of these breakers are bringing the swells, the ocean, all the way up almost to the base of this hotel here, which is a little bit disconcerting at times. We still have about another hour and a half to go before we get to complete high tide. We should be okay with this, and really overwash on the east-facing coast here on the Outer Banks really shouldn't be that much of a problem tonight. South-facing beaches on Hatteras Island, all the way on over to Ocracoke Island in particular, some overwash already has occurred on Ocracoke Island over Highway 12, and that's probably going to happen again here at this time of high tide overnight. They're getting the worst of it down here on the Outer Banks. Up here toward Nag's Head, Kitty Hawk, Manio, Kildova Hills, so far so good, but we still have to watch where Bonnie heads from here. We'll keep you updated. Right now, let's get back to you, Dave.
Jeff, good work. Thanks a lot for that live report from North Carolina. Well, there you have it, my friend. A Category 3 hurricane makes landfall in the United States earlier today, officially at Cape Fear, North Carolina. We have some new data, the 9 p.m. That's the latest information we have on Hurricane Bonnie. 34.1 north, 77.8 west. A drift, slow drift to the east, perhaps over the last couple of hours, placing the center near Wilmington. Winds now 105 miles per hour, which means it's weaker than it was earlier today. Isn't that right, John?
That's right. As far as Wilmington goes, I looked at the latest observation. The pressure is rising rapidly there, and that suggests it's already begun to move away from there a little bit. The wind is shifted into straight north, so the center evidently passing just east of the city of Wilmington.
But still, hurricane warnings are in effect for most of the North Carolina coast.
That's right. They have not yet been discontinued, and I'm sure they won't be for a while. Although, as we indicated earlier, I think you will see a gradual weakening of the winds.
This is still going to be a player, however, up and down the East Coast until it's out east of the Canadian Maritimes, at least as far as high surf goes and rip currents, even up into New England.
Well, it's already been a player there because that surf is already up there, headed up there, and has been for days and days. And what we're concerned about a little bit, once it gets off the coast, is how it might interact with the cold front that's stationary south of New England. Sometimes when the remnants of a hurricane interact with the front, you get sort of overrunning and some pretty heavy rain, and we're going to be watching that very carefully.
John Hope, thank you very much, hurricane specialist here at the Weather Channel. So this may be a story for the Northeast, from Philadelphia all the way up to Boston. Rain, wind, perhaps both, and certainly some pounding surf. So watch it out there at the beach, and stay tuned to the Weather Channel, or check us out online at weather.com. Well, our team coverage of the U.S. weather continues with Terry Smith and Paul Emick.
Well, there's other weather to talk about across the country tonight, starting with some strong to severe storms across the plains. Good evening from the studio with this edition of Weather Center. I'm Paul Emick, and it's being sponsored by Healthy Choice.
And I'm Terry Smith. We're also seeing heavy rains that could be a real problem for parts of New England tonight and tomorrow. But let's begin with the severe weather. First of all, showing you the big picture. And what we're looking at here is the frontal boundary that's stalled in New England. And that's why we could see some heavy rains that are very persistent. The other area, the severe weather that we're talking about here in the central sections of the country, as we have a warm front that's moving on through, a little bit of an upslope flow, plenty of very humid.
Hurricane Bonnie is still bashing North Carolina with flooding rains, tornadoes, damaging waves, and hurricane-force winds. It's moving slowly, so the devastation will continue through the overnight hours. You are now looking at a live picture of the scene at Morehead City, North Carolina. That area has sustained a variety of damage, and we'll take you there live for the latest on the damage here in just a few minutes. This is Weather Center, a special edition of it featuring Hurricane Bonnie and, of course, the weather across the rest of the country, the impact Bonnie may have up the coast. Your forecast for Thursday all coming up. But first things first, let's have a look at that hurricane here on satellite imagery, color-enhanced satellite imagery. And as you can see, this hurricane is not moving. It's moving at about a walking pace northeast of Wilmington, North Carolina. So it's just sitting and spinning and spinning and spinning. It has weakened some, but it is creating problems. But I'll tell you what, you might be hard-pressed to believe that this thing is weakening by looking at Jim Cantori. He has been reporting live from Morehead City, North Carolina all day, and the wind is still blowing out there. Isn't it, Jim?
David, is still hammering, no doubt about it. We continue to gust at least to 60 knots tonight. And personally, it's definitely taken its toll on me, standing out here all day, giving you the live reports. I'll tell you that right now. But the good news is we did get a chance to drive around a little bit, so the winds aren't that bad. And we did not see a tremendous amount of structural damage here. We have heard word that there was a tornado in northern Carteret County that did cause some damage to a barn. So, you know, that's one of the aspects you get when you're in that northeast semicircle, which is where we have been all day, and unfortunately will be all night because this thing is not moving very much. So the beaches are going to continue to take a pounding, and I'm 2.5 miles inland, so we continue to get these winds very, very strong tonight. Of course, heavy rain is another aspect, and the possibilities of flash flooding. Now, for all the people in North Carolina that have lost power so far, there's not going to be any big hurry to get that power back, because with these winds this strong and this weather so miserable, there is just no way those power crews are going to be able to get out and fix these power lines. So tonight, tomorrow, probably for a good part of the morning, it's going to remain rather ugly. Hopefully after that, this thing will get a little shove on off toward the north and east. For now, we're just kind of waiting it out, Dave, and hoping this thing gets a budge and gets out of here quick. Back to you.
Jim, you've done yeoman's work. Take a break. We'll see you here in the morning. Jim Cantori live from Morehead City, North Carolina. What a day it has been. Well, we turn to our meteorology supervisor here at the Weather Channel, one of the many tropical weather experts. This is Stu Ostro. And Stu, this is a hurricane that has come to a screeching halt. Moved across thousands of miles of ocean in the Atlantic, and now it's stopped right at the North Carolina coast.
The steering currents were very strong when it was way out there in the Atlantic. Then it slowed down for a time north of the Caribbean. Then it sped up just enough to make its move toward land, and now that it's there, poof, stopped in its tracks, and we expect only slow movement in the near term.
We can see that slow movement on Doppler radar here.
We can. This is just not moving very quickly. It's just creeping up the coast. Some of these outer bands coming across where Jim was, and I also wanted to point out that Jim is 2.5 miles inland. We feel he's okay there, but undoubtedly the winds right along the coast and the barrier islands are stronger. They're coming in onshore. Winds blow counterclockwise around low pressure systems in the northern hemisphere. We're near high tide, and the battering waves and the tide levels much higher than usual are undoubtedly causing problems, unfortunately.
This is a hurricane we're going to have to deal with all night and at least part of the day tomorrow in North Carolina.
We would like this to be one that we could say by tomorrow morning it's exiting out to sea and accelerating, but we don't see any sign of that.
Speaking of wind, let's have a look at this wind map here in North Carolina, and you can tell us what we're looking at.
We're looking at some of the inland gusts, as we mentioned last time, right along the water and out over the water. The winds are quite a bit stronger, close to 100 miles per hour just offshore here, and even just over hurricane force, about 74, 76 miles per hour around Cape Fear.
Been pretty windy here in Raleigh, gusting at 30 miles an hour with rain, and in the Norfolk area it's also beginning to get windy. So a large area is being impacted by our very slow-moving hurricane. Another factor, the heavy rain. This is the rain that's fallen since 8 o'clock this morning. This is probably an underestimation. We've had reports of 7 inches in Jacksonville.
It may be an underestimation, and in general, as we go through the overnight hours and on into the day, people who live in flood-prone areas, or even if you don't usually get flooding from your basic heavy shower, watch out, because rainfall amounts of already 7 inches have been reported. If that becomes 10 or 15, or hopefully not, but perhaps even 20 inches, we could be talking about very serious flooding, and the annals of hurricanes are filled with serious flooding as hurricanes and tropical depressions and tropical storms wind down.
Well, we continue our team coverage by checking back into the coast where they have had some heavy rain. Certainly Wrightsville, North Carolina, and Nags Head. We're going to go to Wrightsville first to Bill Keneally, who's been out there all day. Bill?
Dave, good evening to you, and we have better news here. It doesn't look like it, I know, but the winds are now starting to turn around more to the north and eventually to the northwest, and hopefully not only will that help to eventually dry things out, but it'll help to alleviate some of the flooding expected tonight at high tide. As opposed to pushing it back towards the mainland, it'll start to pull it on out and get a lot of that high water out of the sound. Behind me, Dave, quite a witness to what happening today. We saw this huge tree come down, and believe me, this guy's been there a while. He withstood, we're estimating he's a good 50 years old. He withstood the likes of Hazel and Diana and Bertha and Fran, but he fell prey to Hurricane Bonnie, as did a late model minivan behind him. Dave, the height of the storm, well, about noon to 4 o'clock. We had videos shot about that time. Let's take everybody out there now. And you can see there were a lot of trees down, a lot of wind whipping things, some power lines down, some debris in the road on occasion. There was some tidal flooding, by the way, about a half a mile to my right. There was flooding at that time of, which was actually low tide, but it was a very high low tide, much higher than the normal high tide would be. But things appear to be in better shape. Power's coming on piecemeal across the area. About an hour ago, my producer Laureen checked, and Carolina Power and Light said about 180,000 customers were without power. So we're faring a little better here. The news, hopefully, is pretty good up the coast as well. Let's get a check on things late this evening with Jeff Morrow. Jeff?
Well, Bill, your bad news is actually good news for most of the Outer Banks. That means with the hurricane stalled out in that area, or moving very slowly, and all the wind and the rain that you and Jim Cantore have had to deal with, things here have been much, much more tranquil in a comparative case. We still have wind, and the wind is actually picking up tonight, probably gusting upwards of 30 miles an hour to maybe 35 along the coast here. Let's pan down and show you quickly some of the ocean coming in. We are very close to high tide, and we've got a lot of water coming up right up almost underneath where the hotel is, foundation is here, which is a little bit disconcerting. But again, it is at high tide, and we expect the water to drop back a little bit. But depending on where Bonnie ends up going, things could deteriorate here on the upper Outer Banks as we head on through the day tomorrow. Of course, we'll be here to keep you updated on that. Right now, let's go back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Jeff. We're concerned about our friends to the northeast, how the weather could deteriorate into southern New England, even the Jersey Shore. Thanks so much for that report. For that, we go to Stu Ostro once again as our team coverage continues. Stu, what's the forecast for this thing? Who's going to be affected once it moves out of North Carolina?
One quick point first, in the 11 p.m. advisory from the Hurricane Center, top wind is now 100, so it is continuing to weaken, albeit very slowly. As far as what happens farther north, since the hurricane is not moving much, the direct effects, the excessive rains, the battering winds along the coast, and the storm surge flooding are going to be confined to North Carolina, maybe sneaking up a little bit into Virginia. Some indirect effects with some locally heavy showers sporadically up the coast to near New York City, southeastern New England. but the direct effects will stay south of them. It's a very humid night in New York City. Dew points in the mid-70s. Folks in New York City know there's very steamy nights. So there could be some of these tropical showers, but it's farther south that the brunt of the hurricane is hitting.
Washington, D.C., problems tomorrow?
Nothing serious. Again, maybe a few of those showers. As you get south of Washington, D.C. into southeastern Virginia, that's where you begin to get more into the direct effects of the hurricane.
Stu Ostro, Meteorology Supervisor, thanks once again for your expertise. And thank you for keeping us in mind for the latest in Hurricane Bonnie updates. Of course, there's more weather going on across the country. You can check in with us anytime you need us, on camera, of course, or on our website at weather.com. Well, it's Sharon Resulton in the studio. She continues our team coverage of U.S. weather and the forecast for Thursday.
Thanks a lot, Dave. There is other weather to talk about across the country tonight, starting with some strong to severe storms across the plains. Good evening from the studio. As Dave and Stu talked about, well, we may eventually... Good evening and welcome to this edition of Storm Watch. As we show you at 10 minutes before the top of every hour, we'll pinpoint where the strong thunderstorms can be found across the lower 48. And we're also going to check out the potential for some severe weather as we head into the overnight. But first, a look at your tropical update, and we'll take you, of course, to the coordinates of Bonnie. And Bonnie is weakening. It's slowly weakening. That's the good news. The problem is that it's also nearly stationary, and so while we do eventually expect to find more of a north-northeastward movement, chances are that won't be a significant movement until, say, around Friday. So what we're left with is a nearly stationary hurricane winding in a tremendous amount of tropical moisture, and the potential is there for more flooding as we work our way through the overnight and on into Thursday. If you're plotting at home, latest coordinates at 34.2 north, 77.7 west as of 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, 20 miles to the east-southeast of Wilmington, North Carolina. This made landfall earlier right around Cape Fear, and again, a portion of it has, for the better part of the day, been right at the coast. And now it looks like since most of that center of circulation is now over land, that weakening trend has begun throughout the evening. Central pressure 967 millibars. A quick peek at the hurricane warnings that remain in effect, generally from the North Carolina-Virginia border, extending down to Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. North of that point, as you go north of North Carolina border, you're going to find around Smith Point, Virginia, up around the Chincoteague area, we have hurricane watches in effect, and slowly but surely we do think that your weather will deteriorate. Oh, if you're watching from Virginia Beach or maybe around the Norfolk area, as some of those bands of moisture begin to lift on northward, and certainly the winds will be picking up, and it's going to be a rather slow evolution as we head through the overnight and on into your Thursday. Direct impact for you as you head across much of North Carolina. I'm not just talking about the coast, but as you can see, well inland around the Jacksonville area, for instance, you have seen some heavy rain and some very constant winds. Same is true around New Bern. And even around Raleigh-Durham, you found the rainfall coming down. There's some heavier bands or some thunderstorms. So copious amounts of moisture. Just imagine an overnight how tough it's going to be to sleep here for folks when you hear that wind howling. And we're talking about sustained winds in many cases around 30 miles per hour and gusting much, much higher than that. Some of the strongest winds still seem to be offshore, though, so that's at least a piece of good news. But a lot of power outages, as you might imagine, a lot of trees down, power lines down, and until the winds subside, it's going to be very tough for the power companies to get out there and do repairs. So that's an update on Bonnie, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Bonnie in more detail and what you can expect for the next 48 hours or so along the East Coast, coming up next on Weather Center. Hurricane Danielle is out here too. Now this has been undergoing quite a bit of shear, so now winds are down to 80 miles per hour. Please don't let your guard down with Danielle, as it's expected to continue to track over warm open waters. It will eventually reach into an area where there's going to be less of that shear, and that means it will have a chance to maybe increase in intensity, and the general thinking is that chances are it will start to gain a little bit more strength. But do notice that this is passing to the north of the Leeward Islands. It's going to continue in virtually essentially the same direction. So it's going to pass north of the islands, but could gain a little bit of strength. And as we head toward the weekend and early next week, we might have to watch out for Danielle. That's a maybe. So just kind of keep an eye on it and tune in occasionally to the Weather Channel, find out what's happening there. Hurricane Howard continues to head further and further away from land, so this is really not a big deal as far as keeping an eye on it, except maybe for ships. Sustained winds of 100 miles per hour and steady weakening is expected to continue with Hurricane Howard in the eastern Pacific. All right, let's go ahead and look at what's going on closer to home as we take a look in the southeast. Anytime we have a landfalling hurricane, we have to worry about the potential for severe weather. We have had some reported tornadoes that did some damage in North Carolina earlier on. Tornado watch remains in effect. And again, a lot of times this is some of those outer bands that are moving on in that can produce the severe weather. So that is something we'll be watching out for as we head into the overnight. And even into the northern and central plain states, the potential for severe weather. We have had some severe weather and some wind damage heading into, I believe it was Franklin County in east central Kansas, damaging about 10 homes. But we've also got still some severe weather moving out of Montana into the Dakotas and even into north central South Dakota. We continue to see some severe weather. Once again, coming up next on Weather Center, full details on Bonnie, and again an emphasis on what's going to happen through the overnight. Will you be affected in Norfolk during the overnight? We're going to check that out as well. Don't go away. Dave Schwartz will be right back.
Hurricane Bonnie continues to pound the eastern North Carolina coast. Get the latest report on Weather Center coming up after your local forecast.